2:17 a.m. on the dawn of November 29th, 2025. The 19th night of the campaign to break the Kalibr network in Sevastopol. The Podlit K-1 radar inside the Russian command bunker flashed as if someone had carved a gash straight across the sea's surface. 12 ultra-low streaks lit up at the same moment, skimming under 50 meters, pushing the edge of transonic speed, hugging the wavetops like metallic blades. The duty crew first assumed they were cheap UAVs, but the target classification board flipped red in rapid succession. On the coastal infrared feed, a long gray body lunged into frame, a storm shadow, its hot exhaust slicing the sea surface into a thin white line. One more night, Ukraine drove its long-range missile campaign to the very heart of Sevastopol's defenses. Weeks before that night, in Ukraine's operations rooms, the Sevastopol-Odessa axis was no longer a simple geographic line. In their eyes, it had become a blazing red streak, because each night, Kalibrs lit up from inside the bay and punched through power grids, fuel depots, grain terminals. One night meant one salvo, and each salvo snapped another link in the logistics chain. To Moscow, Sevastopol was impenetrable, an S-400 layer arched like a dome, and beneath it Bukpantsir, bastions stacked thick, forming an A2/AD zone where anything flying low should be shot down. On Russian planning maps, Sevastopol showed up as a deep red block, an absolute no-go zone. But Ukraine read the same map with different data, using satellite imagery to redraw depot positions, UAVs to track ship movements, SIGINT to catch emission rhythms, and local sources to mark bunker doors and ammunition routes. When all of that was overlaid, the dome that looked solid on paper suddenly showed its seams, the kind of exploitable gaps planners search for. The 19th night wasn't a surprise. It was the point where three preparations converged, slicing into the command network, grinding down munitions depots and coastal air defenses, then pressing fires into the core of Sevastopol Bay, the place Russia believed untouchable. To understand what happened on the 19th night, you have to go back a few days to when Ukraine began targeting the command and control brain of Sevastopol. In Ukraine's ops rooms, Crimea was no longer a blank patch. It had turned into a C2 mesh with every node visible. Satellite images arrived daily, pinning down the coordinates of command clusters, vehicle lots, bunker mouths. High-altitude UAVs traced full surface ship routes. Offshore, NATO reconnaissance vacuumed up the Black Sea Fleet's radio traffic, turning every call and burst of data into dots on a map. Just days earlier, the real-world strike on Saki Air Base that international media highlighted had given Ukraine a kind of luxury, a free demo of how Russian air defenses and C2 behaved when hit squarely in central Crimea. On an afternoon near November 28th, shortly after 4:16 p.m., Ukraine pulled the pin. A volley of HIMARS and ATACMS slammed into depots near Inkerman. On the ground, it looked like one big blast and several warehouses vanishing. At the operational level, it was a deliberate provocation meant to force Sevastopol's air defense cluster to go to maximum alert. S-400, S-300, Buk, Tor systems around the bay lit their radars, boosting power and tightening scan cycles. Within minutes, on Ukraine's electronic intelligence screens, each battery's spectrum, scan pattern, coverage angle, and dead zone appeared like an exposed circuit diagram. The destroyed depots were secondary. The living air defense map they had just captured was the real prize. The following night, near midnight, at a western Ukrainian airfield, a pair of Su-24M rolled out. Each carried two storm shadows. Their route had been carved from data gathered hours earlier, threading precisely through gaps between S-400 and S-300 kill boxes, where scan density thinned and radar geometry was unfavorable. A few kilometers off course would have meant stepping straight into a kill zone. Around midnight, two storm shadows dropped from their pylons, hugging the water and following Crimea's rocky coast. On the Pantsir and Tor shoreline displays, they appeared as just a few ugly low returns buried in clutter and swarms of decoy UAVs saturating the radars. That brief hesitation, long enough for operators to ask themselves whether they should fire, was all the time the missiles needed to slip through. The first cleared Cape Chersonesus, clung to the cliffs, then punched into the ventilation cluster and surface structures of the Black Sea Fleet's underground command post. On infrared, the impact showed up as a bright pinprick before the whole frame went white. The structures around the bunker mouth burst apart, surface vehicles flung aside like toys. Tactically, that strike erased a fortified target. At the operational level, It tore the main control center of Sevastopol out of the network at the most sensitive moment. The second missile hit the relay node near Nakhimov with enough force to wipe antenna arrays, burn equipment racks, and force the undersea cable linking that node into the network to be cut off the grid. From that moment on, coastal radar data and command directives no longer flowed directly to the center. They had to detour through backups that were slower and less reliable. Near dawn, from the bay's mouth, Sevastopol still looked packed with warships, piers, and coastal guns as if nothing had changed. But on internal comms, the rhythm was off. Orders arrived late, alerts reversed sequence, and air defense crews had to stay on the line longer to confirm. Every delayed second and every extra emission were logged by Ukraine's electronic reconnaissance. That was the real result of Phase 1. Not just the destruction of a single command post, but the bending of the entire C2 network of the Black Sea Fleet, pushing it into a vulnerable state right before the next blow. After Sevastopol's command network had been struck, Ukraine did not immediately switch to attacking ships. The next phase was reserved for the things that kept this base alive under fire, namely air defenses and ammunition reserves. In the nights that followed, the tempo of attacks changed. Instead of storm shadows only appearing from time to time, the sky over Crimea started to get used to a density of cheap UAVs at a level never seen before. Every night, after about 1 a.m., swarms of UJ-26, Beaver, and domestic UAVs would in turn appear on Russian radar. Some held medium altitude, some flew skimming the sea surface, and some moved so slowly they were almost stationary at the tactical level. These were small, cheap targets and easy to destroy. At the operational level, they were tools designed to force the Russian air defense network to burn through missiles at a high rate. One night in the middle of this sequence, sometime after 1 a.m., a wave of UAVs was pushed into the Feodosia and Saki area. Pantsir, Tor, and Buk batteries were forced to respond at full capacity. In the sky, dozens of 57 E6 and 9 M331 missiles were launched in succession, forming a crisscrossing layer of fiery trails. From below, it might have looked like a large-scale illumination barrage. In the logistics ledger, it was dozens of high-priced air defense missiles burned in exchange for a much cheaper number of UAVs. In a single night, that expenditure bit into coastal stockpiles. A few days later, when air defense ammunition depots had to start rotating stock and bringing in missiles from other areas, the second Storm Shadow salvo was launched. Near midnight, another Su-24M flight dropped low over the sea, following exactly the corridor opened in the first phase. This time, the targets were no longer command centers. The missiles were now aimed at ammunition depots and long-range early warning radar. After midnight, two Storm Shadows hugged the western cliffs toward ammunition depots near Sevastopol. On the UAV feed, a cluster of flat-roofed warehouses appeared, jammed close together. The first missile punched through the roof and detonated inside. For a few seconds, it was just a single explosion. Then artillery shells, missile canisters, and propellant pellets began to blow in succession. Each cook-off created a fresh fireball big enough to damage structures and civilian roofing hundreds of meters away. Within minutes, the entire depot cluster was destroyed and the surrounding area was no longer usable in any normal sense. At the operational level, this meant that weeks' worth of air defense ammunition reserves were lost in one night, and every transport route bringing in replacement rounds afterward became a priority target on Ukraine's map. In the same salvo, another Storm Shadow struck a Nebo-M long-range surveillance radar sighted deep inland. The blast did not produce visuals as spectacular as the ammunition depot, but it was still enough to blow the phased array antenna off its mount, warp the support frame, and burn out the control cabin. For a system like Nebo-M, losing both the antenna and the cabin is not minor damage. The entire complex had to be taken offline for an extended period. On the Black Sea axis, one long-range watchful eye went dark. After these nights, Sevastopol still had air defenses, but not at the same density as before. Some high-quality missiles had to be pulled in from other regions to compensate, and certain radars had to cut their operating time, switching to cyclic scans instead of continuous coverage. From Ukraine's perspective, that was the sign Phase 2 had achieved its goals, because the wall of air defenses was no longer seamless, and stretches of coastline now appeared on the map, where Storm Shadows could hug the sea surface with a lower probability of detection and interception. setting up the phase of direct strikes on ships and piers in the nights to come. Once the command network had been hit and ammunition depots and radars suppressed, Sevastopol was no longer a sealed defensive cell. Ukraine now had two key advantages: a relatively clear corridor along the coast and an air defense network forced to husband its best missiles. The next step was straightforward: shift fires onto ships and piers. Satellite imagery after Phase 2 showed the port layout clearly, with Admiral-class frigates moored at the southern pier, Rapuchas and support ships to the north, and a dry dock cradle lifting a hull out of the water. Exact positions changed by the day, but everything still lay within storm shadow range as long as Su-24Ms could approach along the corridor that had been opened. On a low-activity night, before midnight, while Russian air defenses were still busy dealing with stray UAVs on the outer ring, a Su-24M flight dropped low offshore, skimming the coast as in previous runs. The pair of storm shadows was programmed with coordinates plus target shapes, including pier length, dry dock dimensions, and distance to workshop structures. One missile struck the rear section of the dry dock. The first blast ripped through the cover, and the overpressure below shifted and warped the hull on its supports, knocking that repair site out of action in the short term. On paper, no ship was sunk in reality. At least one hull was removed from the campaign for many months. In the following nights, the strike tempo thickened and moved closer to the main berths, while air defenses still had to use top-tier missiles to deal with UAVs. Su-24M flights exploited gaps in readiness to use storm shadows against fuel depots by the port and technical support nodes, forcing firefighting and logistics units to spread their resources. By the 19th night, the moment Podlet K1 registered 12 ultra-low targets, the goal had shifted to a concentrated blow on ships and piers. At 2:17 a.m., Ukraine had enough data to assign trajectories onto two military piers, one Kalibr carrier mooring area, and one cluster of support facilities in the bay. In the final seconds, infrared cameras on UAVs captured one storm shadow hitting the gap between hull and pier and detonating right at the base of the structure. The pier was cratered. The concrete deck collapsed, the hull pitched forward, and the mooring lines snapped. Other missiles struck warehouse blocks and outfitting yards, toppling stacks of containers filled with spare parts and handling equipment right at the water's edge. A night like that did not destroy all of Sevastopol, but it hit with precision at the points that mattered most: where ships dock, where ships are repaired, and where technicians have to stand to keep the fleet running. In the days that followed, satellite images showed Admiral-class frigates pulling away from their old berths, and several large hulls appeared in Novorossiysk and more distant ports. The area that had once been dense with warships thinned out, left mainly with small craft and support vessels. That shift was a clear sign that Sevastopol was no longer a safe anchorage for Kalibr carriers. From that point on, every time Russia wanted to use Kalibr from the Black Sea direction, launch distances had to be pushed farther back, flight times grew longer, and the path had to pass through more layers of reconnaissance. Phase 3 did not just damage piers and hulls, it forced the Black Sea Fleet to abandon what had been treated as a rear area sanctuary and pushed its operations out into waters with far less cover. After the night of strikes on the piers, reconnaissance UAVs circled high overhead, recording Sevastopol Bay in two clearly different states, a before and an after. The dry dock was now nothing but warped steel framing, with the hull on the cradle lying askew and unable to be lowered back into the water. At the main berth, a whole section of pier had been gouged out. The concrete surface snapped and buckled, leaving no way for large ships to come back to their former positions. If you list everything out, the Black Sea Fleet lost at least one frigate for many months and had another ship heavily damaged, plus one underground command post, one relay node, one surveillance radar, one large ammunition depot, and one dry dock. In exchange, Ukraine spent about 14 Storm Shadow or Scalp EG missiles on paper. That loss exchange is only a few lines of text. On the operations map, it represents a naval base being forced to change the way it works from the ground up. Taken together, the three phases form a fairly clear campaign structure. Ukraine did not use Storm Shadow in a shoot as many as possible fashion, but instead used about 14 missiles to successively hit the command network, thin out air defenses, burn ammunition depots, and only then shift to ships and piers. The ultimate goal was never just to count how many hulls were sunk. The real objective was to force the Black Sea Fleet out of Sevastopol, pulling its formation farther away, costing more time, and exposing it longer every time it wanted to launch Kalibr. From this campaign onward, any naval base lying within about 250 to 300 kilometers of an opponent has to face a new question and answer it honestly, whether this base is really still a safe anchorage or just a convenient set of coordinates for long-range missiles. That question is not just for Russia or Ukraine, but for every fleet still relying on the idea of an untouchable base.